Hey everybody, thanks. I'm here with Chris Santamaria. Chris is an IFBB Pro, a coach of over 20 years, and just an amazing human being. So Chris, thanks so much for being with me here today.
Yeah, thank you very much for that intro. Appreciate it.
Of course, man. So we're speaking in January. You and I had been chatting for a while. There was nationals back in, I think it was like early December, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So how did that go for you? I know you had a couple people or maybe even a bunch of people competing. How did that go?
So it was pretty good. I think as being a coach yourself, you can relate where we're in a sport where it is subjective, right? So it's hard to kind of be upset, you know, at the outcome because at the end of the day, it's the opinion of five judges, right? So it's opinion based, and whether there's some politics or not, at the end of the day there's nothing really you can do except for just get better. I had one client figure it was their first national show, and we ended up placing third, so we missed her pro card by one spot, which that's kind of heartbreaking as a coach. I know, like, it usually takes me a day or two to kind of just like work it out, just like you have to realize it's out of your control. It's in the judge's hands, and it's also in your client's hands as far as what they execute or what they don't execute, you know. So overall, it was a great showing. I'm definitely proud of the look we had, but it would have been a little better with the pro card.
And yeah, you're right. It's really, I mean, it's hard on both coach and client, right? Like you're really invested in that process and you want the best outcome possible. But you're right. At the end of the day, there is politics, there is personal preference. We can't control everything. So in a situation like that, right? She got third, so she got really close. How did you kind of deal with that, both in terms of your own emotions and hers? Because I'm sure she was both excited and disappointed.
Yeah, it's always really a fine line, and it's obviously going to vary from person to person. Just from how many shows that I've done, and just being a competitor myself, I know that right after you walk off stage, I mean, you're not even in the right headspace to make any decisions. It's like, they say on the bottles, don't operate heavy machinery or drive. You're kind of in that same sort of state where, it's relief that you're done. You could be very angry that you didn't place how you wanted to, or, maybe you cramped on stage, or if you won, then you're kind of like, well, great, but then what's next? Like, where does that put me now? Like, what's the next thing for me? So there's a lot of mixed emotions when it comes down to it. And I always try to kind of give the athlete their space, obviously congratulate them no matter what the place, because just accomplishing a prep is something that a lot of people can't do in itself. So it's like just the fact that they got on stage and finished the job is a huge feat in itself. I like to typically give clients a day or two, usually by that Monday. It's kind of time to either meet in person, have a FaceTime, or at least a phone call on kind of the next steps. What's the next? If we miss the pro card, what are we shooting for next? And kind of assess where they're at mentally, because there's so many emotions that go through your head.
No, totally. And I mean, and you're right. Like there's this survivorship bias, right? Like we see all the people that make it to the stage, but there are so many people who can't even get through the prep. So that in and of itself is a huge accomplishment. I mean, honestly, I think especially like in the world we live in this kind of pampered world in America where everything is like pretty easy, a prep might be the hardest thing that some people ever do.
Oh
It might
yeah.
be the most suffering that they've ever gone through.
Yeah, that's 100% accurate. And in fact, I had a couple people tell me that last year, where word for word, like, coach, like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done.
Yeah, which is,
So
I mean, which is a blessing, right? Like it's good that that's the world we get to live in, the lives we get to lead. It does feel a little silly, right? Like if you sort of take a step back and you're like, oh shit, like the hardest moment of my life was when I dieted for 16 weeks and tanned up on stage. But still, like if that's what it is, that's what it is.
yeah, yeah, 100%, man.
Have you had a situation where someone was so disappointed or burnt out that at the end of the competition they were like, I'm done. Bodybuilding is not for me.
Oh yeah, yeah. I would say there's very few. Most people I find like just with the process and learning about themselves and just that feeling of accomplishment you get when you do finish a prep and get on stage, most people crave it and they just want more of it. They want to know, can I improve on my showing? But yeah, I've had a few, not many. I've had a few where they competed, they looked amazing. Some of them even won their class, and it's just like that's it, they're done. You
That's
know,
it.
uh, and ultimately that's up to them. Whether it's a bucket list or just kind of the feelings that you get throughout the prep, and it's not for everyone.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with just wanting to do a thing. It doesn't have to be your life or your lifestyle indefinitely.
Yeah,
Especially, and I will say, I always like the idea of like going out on top, right? Like, if you're gonna quit, at least quit once you've won rather than once you've lost. I think that's better. I think that's like a better story to tell yourself, right? Like, you want to walk away victorious.
yeah, 100%. Because then you're always going to think about it, like, what if I continued? But then you always have that memory of the last thing you felt when you see your picture of the last show is like, hey, I won, you know, and that's a good feeling, to end on too.
Oh yeah, I remember we always reflect on and get stuck on the opportunities we missed, right? Like, you don't spend like, I mean, yeah, if you're smart and positive, maybe you focus on the victories, but the things that keep me up at night are like, the chances I didn't go for, like the girls I didn't ask out, right? Like those are the mistakes that you really regret. And so I think if you can go out on top, that's way better.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, man. That's a good point.
So you've worked, right, like you've been a coach for over 20 years. Imagine you've had people who've gone through multiple competitive seasons, right? Year after year. Is that the case? Yeah, yeah. So like what's I don't know, what's like the kind of maybe either what's the kind of typical sort of mental evolution of an athlete? Like have you seen someone go from like a timid, everyday, normal person to like a fierce competitor? Or is it kind of always the case that someone is, dialed in from the beginning and they're dialed in at the end?
That's a great question. I got to be honest, like, I would say some of my favorite clients to work with are those where they start with you and you kind of go over your short term and long term goals, but you realize quickly early on that they have no confidence and no self esteem. And I always feel bad for those types of people. We've all been in situations where we're just starting a new job or you're starting from the ground and it's like, oh man, there's that feeling of you're not 100% sure if you can actually do this. So, to see some people make the changes over the years or over the seasons to where now they're outgoing, they believe in themselves. It's a huge transformation that people go mentally, and I would say those are probably my favorite to work with because when they start, they don't know where my head's at. And like, I coach along with my wife Stephanie, who's also a pro, and like, we always believe in our clients just because we've done it for so long. And we know that if you stick to the program, if you're 90% compliant, you're going to see some really good results. And the client doesn't always realize that in the beginning. So it's kind of like at that point, we have more faith than they do in themselves because we kind of know if you stick to this, we can kind of see the end of the road.
Yeah,
So
you've seen enough people be successful. You've seen enough people follow all the steps. So yeah, like you roughly know where it goes, right? Obviously, there's there's intervariability, but still, like you've got a path.
yeah, yeah. So I would say those would be definitely my favorite to work with. Where at the beginning, I wish they had more confidence, but just to see the change through their personality, it's probably the most exciting as a coach to watch from the outside.
No, totally. I mean, I always think that that's kind of the best part about self-improvement, but like lifting specifically, right? Is that you're teaching yourself how to make progress. You know what I mean? Like you go to the gym the first time, you squat the bar, 6 months later, you're squatting for 2 plates. Like that's magic, right? Like you can't, like if you can do that, you can you can have a, I know you do sales, right? Like you can navigate a sales call, you can do all kinds of normal things because you spent the last 6 months making yourself stronger and better.
Yeah, absolutely. It teaches you a lot outside of the gym, you know.
Yeah. And I think you're right too. Like, we were talking about how a prep is the hardest thing some people do. I think a lot of people just don't know what they're capable of, right? They've never really delved into something super deeply. And bodybuilding is awesome because, again, as you said, like we kind of know how it works. I mean, like you can't turn everybody into Ronnie Coleman, but like you can pretty much make anybody jacked and lean if they follow if they follow a process for long enough. And I think that like people don't do that. People don't necessarily get good at stuff. And so this is an awesome opportunity if someone's dedicated could take the time to really like see what they're made out of.
Yeah, 100%. It teaches you so much. And, you know, we hear it all the time, you know, in the workplace or social interactions, family interactions where, you know, you have that cousin comes up and, you know, he's like, oh, I could never do what you do. And they kind of say that nonchalantly, but it's like if they really thought about what they said, and I always my reply to that every time is, of course you can. Sure you can.
Yeah, of course you can. Right.
There's no reason why you couldn't, you know, but in their head they're so used to just accepting defeat and it just accepting like I could never even try when it's like you know, at the end of the day, like we're not, you know, creating, you know, a form of, you know, a cancer drug or something. Like we're literally cooking our meals. We're going and lifting weights. You know, we're practicing posing. Like, yes, it is very difficult. But when you think about, you know, just the nitty gritty, like this is basic stuff that we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, I love what you said. Like I'll tell you the best. I remember this conversation once. I was like with a friend. We were on social media and we saw this bodybuilder who was, I don't remember his name, but he's someone who was born without all of his limbs. So he's like a guy with only like maybe one arm and maybe one leg, something like that. And he had developed an impressive physique and like it was very cool. And my friend looked at it and he was like, oh, I could never do that. That guy, like, if I only, if you, my friend literally said, he was like, if only I were like that guy, then I could do that. It's like, wait, what? Do you, what? Like, things are harder for him, man. Like, you have literally more arms and legs. You can definitely do what he did. But I think that you're right. Like, people, I don't know whether it's that they think it's harder than it is, or they just don't, they're not willing to go to those places. But I think maybe part of it's that like when you're at step zero, looking at step 100 seems terrifying and impossible. But nobody sees the fact that like you and I didn't start out at, but like you don't start out super jacked. Like you start out as a normal person and you slowly learn how to lift and cook your meals and everything.
Yeah, that's it, man. And I think that's where, you know, we talk about it a lot where yes, social media is great and you know, there's a lot of good things that have come from it. But at the same time, there's a lot of bad things too, because people see constantly all day, they see the end result, you know, and they're like, I want that. You know, like they see, you know, the guy or the girl, you know, in the Lamborghini and they're like, I want that. I want that. But it's like you don't see the steps it took to get there. You know, all the hours of work, you know, all the work meetings, all the cardio sessions, you know, and it's we just all want that immediate gratification, you know, versus if it kind of showed the steps, you know, that's why I like people that are really transparent because you can see like, oh, okay, this took a lot of steps here, you know, and it gives people the idea of, hey, do I want to go down this road or maybe there's a different path for me?
No, you're so right. I mean, it's about patience, and patience is hard. I don't like being patient, right? And I think most of the bad mistakes I made in my life were a result of being impatient, right? Because you want the things now. You want everything now. You don't want to wait. And I think that yeah, it's especially when things like social media, the world we live in, you get to see all the cool stuff that everyone else has, and it's natural to just want it right now. But as you said, it takes time for sure. So you mentioned that you work with your wife. How did you meet your wife?
So, funny story. One of my good friends, one of my best friends, Jared Graff, we had started working together 8 years ago. And he told Stephanie to start working with me. You got to work with Chris. So even to this day, I've been coaching 22 years now. She's the only client that I've ever dated, done anything with. Uh, so I guess it's meant to
Yeah,
be.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
awesome. Yeah.
we worked together, preparing for a local show and then her first national show. So it was really just like months until the idea was like, huh, maybe there is something there here, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean that's tricky, right? Because there's a lot of trust between the coach and the client, and you don't ever want to cross that boundary, right?
Right.
And so obviously, like whatever it was that was there, you guys both sensed it, and you went for it. That's great. And then how did that evolve into like a business relationship?
Yeah. So she had done some training. She's from Fargo. She was in Fargo at the time. So she had done some personal training already and, some kind of coaching on the side. And pretty much once we got together, she moved to, the Minneapolis area extremely quickly. Things went, super quick. And, she wanted to coach alongside me, especially too, as the team was growing. It just made sense because not everyone wants a male trainer. There's a lot of clients, honestly, a huge majority of clients don't really care, male or female, it doesn't matter. But there are some specific clients where they're like, you know what, I feel like I can relate more to a female, and that way it just makes sense for Stephanie to take them on. And there's female stuff too, hormones and all this other stuff that we don't experience. So I think together it just, it made the team much stronger, and then business really just took off after that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So does she only coach female clients, or does she also coach some men too, just occasionally? Yeah. And I don't get to do this often because you have to have the kind of the stars aligned. But right now I'm actually coaching a couple. So I coach them both. Like not I mean separately, right? Like they are together, but they have different programs, of course. Do you ever have that happen? Because I find that I think, you guys being a couple, I feel like it could be really fun to coach couples.
Yeah, we've coached so many couples, honestly, and it is a lot of fun to, because sometimes they have a friendly competition. I actually last week I just got done um, coaching a couple and they've been with me for 4 or 5 years now. And what they do is they prep for their vacations. So
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah, it's really cool. Like they're a great couple. They like to travel a lot. They book cruises, vacations all the time, and they treat it like a contest prep. So they're just as serious as a competitor. The only difference is they're not stepping on stage.
Right,
So
their stage is the cruise ship or the
yeah,
all-inclusive resort, right? Yeah, yeah. No, that's fun.
yeah, yeah. So it's a lot of fun. They get to go on on their trip. Looking amazing, and then obviously they'll enjoy themselves on the trip. And then once they come back, then we get right back to work and kind of set some new goals.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I think that right, like it's nice to have with the couples, right? They can push themselves, but I also think it can help bring people closer together, right? Because they've got a shared goal, they've got a shared struggle, and they can talk about those things.
Oh, totally. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun over the years. Like, and sometimes, for example, this couple, I coach both of them, but sometimes Stephanie will coach the female,
Right, right.
and I'll coach the male, and of course, they have completely different plans. But it's definitely a lot of fun, and for sure, if they get through a prep or a weight loss goal, it definitely does make them stronger too, relationship wise.
Is Stephanie, your wife, is she still competing too?
So she did her 20th show last year. So she did the Legions in Reno. Um, it's funny because people ask her maybe on a daily, weekly basis, when's your next show? That's such a typical question for us, right? Um, at this point, she's undecided. Like she's obviously done so many shows. She's done a lot of pro shows. I don't know if she'll compete again. It would be fun, but at this point, at least right now, January, where she's kind of undecided.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine she's proved all she has to prove, right? If she wants to do more, of course she can. But yeah, at some point, like the cost does start to outweigh the benefits, I think.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, man.
What about so for you guys, since you, I mean, you're what, and you'll be competing again, right? You personally, is
So
that still
I'm
the
kind of
plan?
undecided
Yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
So when I talked to you a few weeks ago, I had gotten this was my ninth abdominal surgery. So this one was strictly cosmetic. So after I had my surgeries and I had the ileostomy bag twice, it left a lot of just terrible looking scars. And I was left with skin. I always had good skin around, around my abs and everything. And I was left with like skin folds and skin flaps and everything. So I'm like, if I'm going to get on stage, especially like a pro stage, it's got to look right. So I did the surgery. It's been almost 4 weeks now, and most of the swelling has gone down. So I kind of have to maybe wait a couple more weeks to kind of, take some progress pictures and see if it's where I want it to look. Um, but if I never stepped on stage again, I'd be completely fine too.
Yeah, I mean, you. How many shows have you competed in?
31.
Yeah, I mean, like that's pretty amazing, dude. Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
mean, you have your pro card. You've done. I mean, I guess you haven't literally done everything. You haven't done, you know, you haven't stepped on the Olympic stage or like done some super secret show for a Saudi prince or whatever. But like you've done a bunch of cool shit. So yeah, I mean, I think that's awesome. You know, it
Thank you.
sucks, and obviously, like to have your health. Your health is the most important thing. To have your skin sideline you does kind of suck, but it sounds like you've got a good attitude about it.
Yeah, like if I had only done like, seven shows, and it's like, man, I feel I would still feel like there's still more to do. But I have so many different shows, like on my phone I have albums of almost every single show. And what I always tell people is I have all those memories 31 times stepping on stage where like there was a different outcome every time. Like I have some that are, some of my best looks, and then some that are, failed miserably. But it was still, I remember them, like it was yesterday, where I'm like, oh, I remember this day, and here's what I did wrong, and here's what I should have done. So I'm left with a lot of great memories that, definitely aid in just being a better coach.
I do, that's funny too. Like, I do think one of the challenges of adulthood is that for a lot of people, your life gets kind of monotonous, right? Like, from ages, I don't know, 24 to 40, like maybe you basically live the same day every day. Maybe you change jobs a couple times. If you have kids, you've got milestones for your children. But there aren't really these like, it's not like when you're a kid and you're like, oh yeah, I went to summer camp, right? Or like I changed high schools. You just don't have these same kind of landmarks. And I actually think that things like competing, things like lifting, they give you literally have a record. Right, like you know what you did for 16 weeks out of this 52 weeks of a year. You know what you were doing. You've got photographs. You probably got spreadsheets, and I think that like that actually helps to make your past more vibrant. Like you just have more stuff. You've got more things to remember. I think it really. I don't know. I think it makes the time more meaningful.
Yeah, 100%. And, like you talk to someone, that's a great point. Cause like, you'll meet someone and they're like the people that have never flown an airplane. You know what I mean? Or like, and in your mind, you're like, how's that possible? But it is possible that there are people out there like, or, like my uncle, he's never owned a cell phone, like you would think in this day, like, how is that even possible? But yeah, going through all that stuff and so many shows, you're right. I'm so like, like Milos Sarchev, he's he's got all the logbooks. So do I. I have all that stuff recorded, and me and Stephanie will tell our clients like, listen, trust me, like I have made that same mistake that you want to do. Like, you want a carb load on Pop Tarts? Like, trust me, that's not going to work.
Although
So
I do love Pop Tarts. The s'mores
yeah.
are the best by far. But yeah. And actually, that's actually a perfect transition. So, because I want to talk to you about peaking because
Sure.
I feel like peaking is this thing that sort of has this mystique to it in bodybuilding, and I don't know that that's necessary, right? Like I think we can kind of unpack it. And you, right, mad scientist that you are, you've got, I don't know, probably how many peaks do you think you've done cumulatively for yourself and other people? Like 1,000?
Oh gosh, it
I mean,
it, it would be like, gosh, maybe close to 10,000.
yeah. I mean, like that's awesome. So let's all right. So let's break it down. So like, tell me what. Give me like your definition of peaking, and like what are the variables that you typically think should be manipulated during a peak?
Sure. Yeah, I love the subject of peaking because a lot of times when people sign up with us, that's one of the questions, like that's one of the big questions, like how do you peak your athletes? Like what type of training do you guys believe in? Like how does it work? So that's a real common question. And, it doesn't work for everyone because obviously, everyone's genetic makeup is different. But, for 90 to maybe 95% of our clients, they are always ready like 2 weeks early. I mean, like within, if it was a Saturday and they had to step on stage the next day, like we would be ready, literally 2 weeks out. For some competitors, even 3 and 4 weeks out. So that's the number one thing when it comes to peaking is you have to be ready. The proper amount of fat loss has to happen in order for you to have that correct look that you're going for and that the judges are looking for.
Right, you're not losing more fat during the peaking. Right, if the fat is
Yeah.
still there, it's not coming off. That's not the purpose of the peak.
Yep, exactly. So, about 2 weeks out is typically, like you said, you're not really going to get much leaner if at all. And now it's time to start, landing the plane and kind of getting your things in line to step on stage. And the best part about it is, when clients ask us that, we usually basically tell them like you're going to be ready early most likely, and we're basically going to roll in with almost the same plan as you've been doing, which sounds so stupid because it's like, that's it? Like, it's really that simple? And the answer is yes. Like, it really is that simple. Like, the work is obviously difficult to get to that proper level of body fat percentage, male and female. But it's like once you're peaked, it's just a couple manipulations to really fill out or get that proper look, maybe drop a little excess water, as we get to the stage. So like for a lot of our competitors, by that point we have record of typically how much water they're drinking. you know the important thing too is like how they look the day after a cheat meal or a refeed. So all of that stuff is documented. How do you look 2 days after? How do you look 3 days after? And we're comparing pictures to know what's the best look, what's the best combination of fullness and dryness so that we can step on stage and be very competitive.
So is that
So
typically a part of your dieting for people? Is that they'll have cheat meals or high days so that they're getting some kind of fluctuation in calories through the week, and so you can look at that?
yes, exactly. So like when I start out a prep, it's pretty, obviously the diet is regimented. But, initially, and I know some coaches, a lot of coaches will agree, and some, like we know some of the top name coaches who would disagree. But I like to give my athletes, for the most part, some type of a combination of a refeed and then, towards the end of the night, your last meal, do a cheat meal, have something that you're really craving. You know, Now, whether it's 16, 20 weeks out, in my experience and opinion, that's not going to affect you, on show day. It's just not. You know, Of course, we're urging against like a lot of dairy, a lot of gluten. That stuff is not really going to help anyone's look. But as we get closer to the show, it's more of a dialed in refeed so that we know how many carbs you're getting, you know, approximately how much sodium, how much water you drinking, how much fats, all that, so that we can kind of perfect that look. And then typically by the time we're 2 to 3 weeks out, we're going to follow that exact same plan so that there's no curveballs, there's no variables, so that we have a pretty good idea of how you're going to look once we, maybe reduce water, a day before the show.
Okay, so if someone's going through like a 16-week prep, maybe in the first couple weeks, their cheat meal is something like I don't know, it's a cheeseburger, maybe it's a couple slices of pizza, right? It's junk food, but it's still not crazy, right? They're not again. I say dairy stuff. Maybe they're staying away from dairy because right that can cause bloating and digestion issues. But there's maybe they're throwing in an extra, I don't know, 1,000 calories once a week, something like that. But then as you get closer, maybe it sounds like 6 or 8 weeks. Then you're starting to really dial that in. And we're like, no, okay, let's make sure you're roughly within this macronutrient profile. We're going to stay away from these foods. And we're sort of, again, like as a scientist, you're tweaking this down and you're saying, okay, like, last week we did, I don't know, we did 300 carbs, which is probably like, actually, on top, that's too much. You spilled. Let's pull it back the next week. And so by the time we get closer, we're roughly, 2 to 4 weeks out, you already have a pretty good idea of how people are actually responding to those excess calories. And then from there, we know like that's what we're going to run as we get closer to actual show day. Is that about right?
That's exactly right. Yep.
So we talked about like we're talking about manipulating food. You also mentioned kind of monitoring people's water intake. As we get to that 1 to 2 week mark, as part of your peak, are you manipulating water and sodium too, or is it mostly still about the food?
It's mostly about the food. Rarely will I ever manipulate sodium. Um, there have been in cases where I have, but it's very rare. Someone would have to, just naturally hold excessive amounts of water for me to really change that. But typically, they're getting approximately the same sodium, throughout the prep up to the show. And as we get closer to the show, I might taper the water a little bit, like on Friday, one day out from the
Mhm.
show.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And who do you mentioned, you said this works for like 90 to 95% of people. Who are the typical outliers? I would, in my experience, it's usually like really big people, right? Really big guys. Peaking tends to be more complicated. I've never peaked a very small female, so I actually don't know what that would be like. But in general, like what are the people on the outskirts?
Yeah, I would say, oddly enough, I've had just some like, average build, like say 200, 210 pounds, somewhere in there, just hold just excessive amounts of water, just like unbelievable amounts, like 10, 15 pounds. And at that point, that's going to be something where, yeah, we might have to pull back on sodium just to really, drop that excess water, and I can kind of account for it too. Like I'll have them give me a weight, let's say at 3 weeks out, the day of your refeed, the day after your refeed, and maybe a day or two after, and kind of see how fast the weight's dropping. And for someone like that, they're going to need to carb load. If we carb load, they're going to need to do it earlier in the week, just so they're not 10 pounds up. And we need enough time to really comfortably drop without stressing the body for that Saturday show.
So for someone like that, would you keep bringing up the carbs and essentially like spill them and then pull it back? Is that typically what you do? Or would you actually still try to not get them to spill?
I try to not get them spilled.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does happen, whether it's, if you're stressed out, if your cortisol's up, if you're still working like on a Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah, totally.
I've had it where clients are working the day before and I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, I told you to take those days off here. So, if they're still working and their stress level's up, we might have to even pull back the carbs at that point, just to compensate for some of the weight gain and the water gain too.
No, yeah, I mean you're right. I mean stress is everything, right? Like that's a huge part of what the prep is just stress management. And I also think it's interesting, when you're talking about normal guys who still hold a lot of water, I have also found that someone who was maybe previously very overweight and they've come down, those guys do tend to hold more water over time.
Oh
I
yeah,
don't know if it's
yeah,
right. I mean, I think it's probably because the fat cells still remain, and so there's places for that water to hide.
yeah. I definitely see that. That's it's always good to know of too. Like when you're onboarding a client, um, because sometimes they'll come to you and they'll look great, but you have no idea. Like, hey, I used to be 350 pounds, but prior.
Yeah,
So that's a
totally.
good point.
Totally. With a first time competitor who's never peaked, how do you like? how do you make sure that they understand like that it isn't magic? You know what I mean? That like right, you said at the top, like they got to be ready 2 weeks out. Is that something that people are kind of like, I don't know, because there is, again, there's this like mystique in this lore that says that like no, the peak is magic. Like how do you kind of disabuse people of that notion and make sure they understand that like no, the diet is really where the work is done?
Yeah, I will usually tell them right on that first email chain, right when we begin the prep. I usually tell them, or if we've had a conversation in person or on the phone, we will tell them like the goal, and we see it 90% of the time is you are going to be ready early. And I like to ease people's minds because it is scary starting a prep. It could be very scary, and there's a lot of emotions, a lot of anxiety, like am I going to be ready? Am I good enough for this? So I always like to tell people like the goal is we're going to be ready 2 to 3 weeks out. That way we just kind of coast in and do some small adjustments before the stage. That way you're totally ready to step on stage and be competitive. Yeah, the other thing too, one kind of funny thing we do is, usually 3 to 4 weeks out, we'll send clients one of our templates, and it leads with, you know, a couple paragraphs explaining like you're going to see a lot of stuff backstage. You're going to see people cramming their faces with Twix bars and Snickers and honey and this and that. And the truth is, by that point, if you're not peaked, like nothing is really going to get you that edge. No amount of rice cakes backstage or peanut butter is going to solve that.
No. Well, yeah, it's people think it's magic, right? Like you press the button, something happens. It's like, no, man, like we've been working for 20 weeks. What you do in the 45 minutes before the show isn't going to accomplish anything.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So that, and it really does save us a lot of questions like, hey, coach, I was talking to, so and so at the gym, and I guess their coach has them doing like, you know, this and that and loading on cereal. And, that way it's kind of already in their head like, oh, Santa Maria's, they're not going to be having me load on this crap, which is kind of good because, like, if they're craving that stuff, like, then it's just like, it's all they think about, you know? And then it becomes more about the food than the actual like stepping on stage.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I will say that's always the thing about cheat meals that I think can be really hard. Is some people, whatever, some people can put down the food and be fine, but some people really do get too fixated. That their whole week gets built around that cheat meal. And it can even, I've had this happen to me where like midway through the cheat meal, you start to get sad because you know that the meal's going to be over. Right? Like you're like still chewing, you're like, I got 3 more bites left, and then I'm back to being, skinny fat, and it's miserable. So like I don't know, I think that again I think it really depends on the client. I don't always do something like that because especially obviously if someone has a history of disordered eating or binging, right? Like that's really important. Again, you mentioned about people, you got to have people disclose stuff at the top so you don't bring them to a bad place. But yeah, I think that can be hard. Food is powerful, right? The draw of food is powerful, especially when you're hungry.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of like we were talking about, like it's like the sport, it's not for everyone. Cheat meals are not for everyone. Like there are some clients that just they can't handle that type of the swing. Um, and there are some clients too where, we give them the option and they're like, you know what? I don't really want that. I just want to, I want to stick to something clean. Like I'll just take a steak and a sweet potato. And those are the clients they're just so easy to work with because they're choosing a good option, something that we can variably measure. And that mentally they've got it locked down. Like if that's all they want, like that's perfect.
Well, yeah, that's always the best too, because if you're someone who wants those hyper palatable foods, those cheat meals, that might mean that you keep that stuff in the house, right? So in a moment of weakness, that's where you go. But if everything is clean and you cheat, what are you going to have, like a Greek yogurt in the middle of the night, right? I mean, I will say I have seen people binge on rice cakes. That can be done if you're foolish enough. But like in general, if you keep your kitchen clean, you'll eat clean. And so I think that you're right. That's it's so much easier to work with someone who doesn't want that.
Yeah, it just it. it tells so much about the client mentally that you just know, like, okay, this is going to be a really smooth process as we get closer to the show.
Yeah. Also, you brought up another point that I think is interesting, right? Is like people hear stuff about other coaches, right? People see what other clients are doing, and I don't know that there's like a solution to that, right? Like people should talk. There's nothing like it's not secrecy, but I do think you have to develop that trust with your client, right? So that they know that even if so and so is doing this, like this is the Santa Maria plan, right?
Yep, exactly. And it's always okay to ask a question, like we have an answer for it, and it's, so we appreciate the questions for sure. But yeah, it does come down to the trust. And I think, one fortunate thing, about us is, because we've been around so long, we don't really get it often, but I'm like, look, like you can go and you can kind of trace the steps back through the IG or Facebook, and it's like so many success stories can't be wrong. Like this is why we do it this way because it works, and obviously there's a lot of ways to do it, but for sure this way works, and here's why.
Yeah, I think having the proof of your past success obviously helps. But I also think to your point, right, like you should explain to people, right? When clients come to me and they ask about X, Y, or Z, like I don't just say do it. You explain the rationale, and sometimes, and I will say, depending on the circumstance, if someone is really insistent, I will let them do something else, and then usually it doesn't work, right? And like I'm never self-righteous about it. I'm not going to be like I told you so, but I think that sometimes, like if someone is really insistent, sure, let them make their own mistake, and then we can come together back again and say, all right, like moving forward, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point.
Does it also ever happen, in the peaking, that somebody comes to you like 8 weeks out from a show, 6 weeks out from a show, and they want you to take them on? Is that something you'd be willing to do?
Yeah, we've had it happen a lot in the past couple of years. um and what I mean by a lot is just normally we don't see that happen, because people do like to hire us, 16, 20, 24 weeks out. um but honestly, we've taken on everyone. Yeah, we've taken on everyone, and you just have to set the expectations. Like, listen, we're starting this like way behind the eight ball here, and we only have a limited amount of time that we can learn your body and make the changes accordingly. So as long as those expectations are kind of set up front, um, we're totally open to it. And more so, the reason is I want to help them out having a good experience at the show, but I also want to help them out on their next goal, their long term goal. Because sometimes the writing is on the wall. Sometimes it's like, well, we're probably not going to win the overall, but with another year's time, you might be able to win that overall. So it's kind of just seeing the client's potential, seeing where they're at, seeing if they're willing to finish the prep strongly, and kind of listen to our guidance, and kind of just more so setting up for future success. Because I know there's a lot of coaches that just they don't mess around with it. It's a strictly no. But no, I mean, we always have like welcoming arms when we're, you know 4, 6, 8 weeks out, just because we know if you stick with us, it's probably going to work, eventually.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, right. If somebody needs help, it's sort of, I don't know. I don't want to ever turn someone away. And I think, as you said, right, like you have to set those expectations. If usually the process is 16 weeks or 20 weeks and they come in at 4 or 6, you got to make it clear that I can't promise you the same result I get everybody else because we're not going through the same process. And I think in particular, one of the things you mentioned is you like to do this gradual approach of seeing how they respond to higher calories to help build that peak. And you're not going to be able to run those experiments when they're towards the end. At that point, you're just going to see how lean they are, maybe make some minor tweaks, and then get them through those last couple period weeks. But you're right, and I think too, people. It takes, we said this a couple times in this conversation. It takes a lot of time to do this, and so if you can get someone through that show, maybe they do well, maybe they don't, whatever. But then you can move them on to the next steps. I think that's really valuable for them, and they can get a lot out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So 2 years ago, we actually, this just popped in my head. I actually took on someone, they were like 9 days out.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's very.
Yeah.
That's like that's nothing.
And the funny thing is, like, one of our clients in Texas had referred this person probably like 4 to 6 weeks out. So still limited time, but it's better than 9 days out, right? So, and we happily took them on. We were able to make some really good changes in the 9 days working with them, and now they're a really strong, loyal competitor. They've been with us over 2 years now, so it's a perfect example of someone that wants the help, and we're able to provide a good service, and they're going to stick with you.
Cool. Yeah, I mean that's. Yeah, I mean obviously that's difficult to do in 9 days. Probably speaks to the fact that they needed the help, right? If you were able to make that big of a difference, it probably means that there were some things that were screwed up before you stepped in. So it's good that you were able to do so.
Yeah, 100%.
So maybe just because you brought up just this notion of sort of service, right, and providing a service. So I know that right, you're in sales too. How do you like? I don't know. Do you think of yourself as being in sales as a coach? I think at this point, right, you got lots of referrals. So I think a lot of your a lot of your leads come in that way. But do you approach this as you would approach sales and generating leads in that sense?
Great question. I would say I approach it the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just feel like with the coaching side, what got me originally into this, over 2 decades ago, I love to help people. So it's a huge reward for me to help someone, whether it's achieving a small goal or something, barely attainable. So it just comes from just wanting to help, and wanting to improve someone's life, and you know that's where the origin comes from. So luckily, we've been able to have so many client success stories where we really don't need to sell it. It's like a billboard. Like, the first thing you look at is the billboard. So me and Stephanie are the billboards. And it's like, all right, are you in shape? Yes, you obviously care about your body. Like, I'm over 40, I'm still in shape. I never thought I'd look like this at 42. So, like, you look at the billboard, and then you're looking at the billboard, and you're like, all right, let me go to the website. Okay, let me read the reviews. So it's like, when someone sees me or Stephanie, they can go to the website, they can go to our Instagram page or Facebook, they can see the client success story. So it's kind of like the product, I feel like it sells itself. So it's one of those things where, like, we're never going to overpromise and under deliver, because ultimately we try to match their energy. So if you come to us and you're like 10 out of 10 motivated, like, we're going to match that. And if you come to us and you're a 2, like, we're going to be a 10 for you. But sooner or later, you're going to kind of realize that you're going to have to do some work to match our 10, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, right. I mean, people, you get out of this what you put in, right? You can't make the meals, chew the food, lift the weights for people,
Yeah,
right? You
exactly.
can all you can do is supply the plan and the scaffolding, but they've still
Yep.
got to follow it.
Yeah. But yeah, to answer the question, yeah, I would say it's the complete opposite. We're more of just like, hey, I just want to help you, achieve your short and long-term goal. Here's how we can do this. If you stick to this 90%, like, you're going to see some really good results, and then, it's like when you go into a shoe store and you're like, not interested, like, can I help you find something, not interested, and then what do? You look around. So that's where, like, from our standpoint, look around, like, take a look at our Instagram, ask some of our clients. I always give, one or two names for someone that's inquired if they're not quite sure. I always tell them, don't take my word for it. Why don't you ask a couple of my clients? Do you want to talk to a male or a female? And a lot of times they do reach out and do sign up, because that referral is obviously going to have some type of success story.
Yeah, and I will say that's been one of my favorite parts about coaching is actually that like the clients form relationships among themselves. And I just think that's so cool is that like you're building this little community. You've got people, they've got shared interests, they've got shared passions, they have shared experiences. And I don't know, that to me that's like one of the best parts about this. That's why I think that's part of why like I love lifting because I love lifting, right? Like who doesn't love lifting? But
Yeah,
like but like the best part is the community, right? Is like getting to share all this with people and be a part of something bigger than yourself.
100%. Yeah, it's it's been great because you mentioned that that's one of your favorite parts. It's definitely one of our favorite parts too. Just seeing relationships form and training partners form. Um, yeah, actually Saturday we do an annual like a team lift, and then we do like a holiday dinner with everyone that can make it.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, and we do a couple of them. We do like a summer one and a winter one. But it's just like you said, it's just building that community to where people don't ask you those weird questions like, "Oh, are you eating again?" or like this is all people supporting, everyone else.
I also love what you said about the billboard. I think I heard this recently. Elon Musk said that the best product in the world wouldn't need a logo,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Right? Because it's so good that like you just buy it. You just know you know what it is. You know what it is sight unseen. You know how good it is. And I like that, right? Like if your product, you don't need marketing and sales if what you have is what people need.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, just like what it was at Porsche, like they don't advertise.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
why would you need
there are no Tesla commercials, right?
Yeah,
There right? Because people buy it.
no need, right?
No need. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, man. Yeah, I love that, man. That is, I love that you guys do those twice a year retreats or lifts. That is so cool.
It's fun, man. It's a lot of fun. Like one year we did a barbecue and we had people at our place and we did like the silly like the egg run with the spoon.
Yeah, yeah. And are
Yeah.
you particular? I mean, are you going out physically for shows a lot of the time? Like obviously for nationals, but for even smaller things, would you go?
Yeah, so 2024 was a really big year for us. 2021 and 24, we went to almost every single show like for our clients. Like every single one. Um it's funny we call it like the tour, like a band would tour,
Yeah, totally.
but in my phone I have like on the calendar I have every single date for 2025 already marked, all the shows. I keep a list of like a roster for what clients are in what show, like how many weeks out. It's it's a lot. We travel a lot, but we definitely enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, being a roadie for the band is hard work, right? Like you got to carry all the shit. Yeah, no, that's no for sure. That's awesome, and that's commendable, right? And that's how you build those relationships, right? And connect with people and stay connected to them because you're there for them.
Yeah, it's definitely a plus to have a coach at your show. It's definitely not necessary, but it's a plus, especially to like for a client wanting just more hands-on, like in person, or someone that's really nervous. Maybe it's their first national show. It can help.
I mean, a bodybuilding show is a weird place, right? So to go through that alone by yourself, I think can be really stressful. And to know that there's going to be someone there to walk you through that probably means that you'll get better results just because you'll be more relaxed, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Cool, man. Yeah, this was awesome. So, is there anything I didn't ask you that you would want to talk about? I know that's a broad question. Anything on
Yeah,
your mind? Anything on your mind, life or coaching wise?
we covered a lot. Um, maybe just kind of going back to the belief in yourself. I covered this on another podcast, but it's something we posted the other day. So I had a client. This was probably it's funny. He's a client of mine now, but he signed on probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And right when he signed on, he asked me a question, and he's like, "Chris, like, what do you think? Like, what do you think about my potential?" And I don't really get that question very often. Like, I don't really remember another time that happened. So, I was kind of shocked by it, and I just answered immediately, and I said, "You will find your true potential when you choose to never quit." And it became a slogan of mine. I actually I got it tattooed.
Oh,
It's
that's
it's
awesome, dude.
it's kind of hard to read, but
Yeah, yeah.
it just goes to show you, like with anything, you can use any example. if you don't quit, maybe you're not going to be in the NBA someday, but you're going to be pretty damn good at shooting hoops, right? And you don't know your potential because when someone starts, especially if they're a beginner, you have no idea what this person's capable of. You don't know their genetic makeup. You don't know how they're going to respond to the food, to the training, to the cardio. So you just have to keep trying to really find that potential. And if you do something long enough, just like Michael Jordan, they cut him from the basketball team, right? So if you do something long enough, you are going to find your potential, and if maybe it's not basketball, maybe you'll never be able to dunk. Well, then okay, I got as far as I can go. Let me try something else. So if it just kind of goes about just that persistence, the perseverance, just to keep going, even though you might fail a few times.
Yeah, I mean, and not criticizing that guy at all. It's a rational question, but it's a fear-based question, right? Like essentially what you're trying to say is you're saying, "Hey, am I good enough? Is this worth am I wasting my time? Is this a thing I should do?" But to your point, like your answer is the only correct one. You don't know. The only way you can find out what you can do is to do it. And I promise you that if you don't do it, you won't get it. Like that we know, right? Like I can't promise you you'll become Michael Jordan. I can't promise you you'll become Ronnie Coleman, but I can promise that you will never achieve those things if you don't try. Right? The worst basketball player in the world is definitely somebody who doesn't play basketball.
Oh
Right?
yeah.
Like, like that's how you get bad at basketball. I can show you how to get bad at basketball all day. I can show you how to get bad at weightlifting all day. Just don't do it.
Right.
Right? And I will say too,
Exactly.
just you brought up being over 40. Actually, today's my birthday. I'm turning 39 today. But
No way. Happy
yeah, yeah,
birthday, man.
yeah. Thanks, man. But
Yeah.
one of the cool things that I think about getting older is that you just have had more time. So like you've just done things for longer, and if you're a person who works with intent and thoughtfulness, you're probably better, right? Like everything I do now at 39, I'm better at it than when I was 29. Like literally, right? Like everything, because
Yeah.
I've had 10 years of practice. You know what I mean?
That's
Like,
it.
and I think that as long as again, we talked about patience, right? You take that long view, you can get good at like fucking anything. You just got to keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a good point, man. It's, probably like yourself too, like in the mirror, like I'm still staring at that 20-year-old that, started bodybuilding. Like, yeah, I have aches and pains here and there, but like at heart, it's like I'm still that, you know, 14-year-old kid that saw Ronnie Coleman as I'm flipping through the Flex magazine and I'm like, this is unbelievable, like,
Yeah. No, I'm still excited and happy. Right. I mean, I will say this. The moment I felt old, which like was years ago, was so I'm a musician too. I sing, play guitar, and the moment I felt old was that like some band, I found some new band that I liked. I don't remember what they were, and they were like 24 or 22, and my first response was like, fuck those dudes. Right. It was just like it was, it was this notion that like, oh, people I like and admire are younger than me. They've accomplished things I wanted to do and I'm older. Like, right, like that feeling. But then I think, but then you come back to the place, well, no, man, like I I can still appreciate excellence no matter what. I'm always going to be happy about that. But B, it's still like they worked harder, like they did the things I didn't do. Right? Like at the end of the day, I'm responsible for everything I have and haven't accomplished. And if I, didn't write the world's greatest rock song, like that's my fault, man. Like it's because I
yeah.
didn't write it. I promise you that the way to get bad at writing rock songs is to not do it. You know, so no, it's definitely I think being older is 99% better, but there are those moments occasionally where it hits you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point, man. I love it.
Definitely, man. Well, sweet. Yeah, thanks so much for this, man. Really appreciate it.
This was a lot of fun. Definitely.